Hi, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back to Kingdom Portions. And I'm Sean Griffin. This is my wife.
Shabbat Shalom, guys. I'm Lindsay.
And we are excited to join you again this week as we go over our portion here from the Torah. We're going to pair it up with things from the prophets, books of wisdom, as well as the Brit Hadasha, called the New Testament. And even we're going to throw in a extra biblical book. Do you remember which one we're doing this week? Is it Jubilees?
I think it's Jubilees.
I think so. Either way, it's going to be fun. We're excited about it. We had a lot of good time. We had a really good time reading the things that we found in this portion this week. We think it's going to bless you. We think you're going to get a lot out of it. So if you're taking notes, grab your pen and paper. We're going to dive right in. All right, guys. So the first thing we're starting off with is Deuteronomy 16 and verse 18. That's where we're going to start. It says, "You shall appoint for yourself judges and officers in all your towns which the Lord your God has given you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment. You shall not distort justice. You shall not be partial. You shall not take a bribe. For a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts the words of the righteous. Justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land which the Lord your God has given you. You shall not plant for yourself an Asherah or any kind of tree besides the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself. You shall not set up for yourself a sacred pillar, which the Lord your God hates." And then we're here at 17. Sweetie, anything particular stick out at the end of verse 16?
At the end of verse 16?
Well, that's
chapter
pretty much
16?
Yeah, I meant to say chapter, sorry, yeah. That's we just finished off the end of chapter 16, and anything pop out to you?
Yeah, what jumped out at me when we were studying this is, "You shall appoint for yourself judges and officers in all your towns which the Lord your God has given you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment." Now, I think we might have heard that phrase somewhere else. We've heard that somewhere later on in the timeline.
Yeah, I think Jesus says that, right?
Yes.
Where is that at? Is it in John?
You would know off the top of your head. I'm not the encyclopedia.
Pretty sure that Jesus covers that in John 7:24,
yeah,
talking about judging with righteous judgment. So, as we mentioned in previous Kingdom portions, Deuteronomy is the book that Yeshua quoted from the most of the 5 books of Moses. So, that's just another little call back right there that we hear, our great teacher, Yeshua of Nazareth, he's actually, the Messiah was teaching directly from Deuteronomy 16, basically. All right. If there's nothing else that you see in there, I just think it's interesting because we have at this moment the appointment of judges and officers. Right. So just in case people were unfamiliar, the judges would be at the gates of the city. That's why we're going to read in later chapters, whereas when anyone transgresses a command and they're brought before the gates, that's usually because it's a term meaning they're going to the judges to hear out a case of some sort to determine. And many times they're supposed to investigate to make sure the accusation is legitimate, because you don't want people being falsely accused.
Yeah.
So that's
there was a process.
That's right. Yeah. Like I said before, it's not just people picking up stones and start wailing. The individuals were not the judges.
Right.
They assigned someone who was worthy of that type of discernment. They had to know the law, right? Yeah. They had to actually know God's words and instructions so they could judge fairly.
That's how you judge with righteous.
That's how you do righteous judgment. Yeah. Because those people were supposed to know the words of the Lord.
Yep.
Okay, we're into 17, and do you want to read 17?
Yeah, I can read chapter 17.
Thank you, sweetie.
All right. "You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep which has a blemish or any defect, for that is a detestable thing to the Lord your God. If there is found in your midst, in any of your towns which the Lord your God is giving you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God by transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun or the moon or any of the heavenly hosts which I have not commanded, and if it is told you and you have heard of it, then you shall inquire thoroughly. Behold, if it is true, and the thing certain that this detestable thing has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out that man or that woman who has done this evil deed to your gates, that is, the man or the woman, and you shall stone them to death. On the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, he who is to die shall be put to death. He shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. The hand of the witnesses shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. If any case is too difficult for you to decide between one kind of homicide or another, between one kind of lawsuit or another, and between one kind of assault or another, being cases of dispute in your courts, then you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. So you shall come to the Levitical priest or the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall inquire of them, and they will declare to you the verdict in the case. You shall do according to the terms of the verdict which they declare to you from that place which the Lord chooses, and you shall be careful to observe according to all that they teach you. According to the terms of the law which they teach you, and according to the verdict which they tell you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the word which they declare to you, to the right or to the left. The man who acts presumptuously by not listening to the priest who stands there to serve the Lord your God, nor to the judge, that man shall die. Thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. Then all the people will hear and be afraid, and will not act presumptuously again. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it, and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return to that way. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. Now it shall come about, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel.
Thank you, sweetie. All right. There's a lot of fun stuff in that one. I don't know about you. But
yeah, we could probably spend a lot of time just on that chapter, as usual.
Yeah, there's a lot of meaty, good, juicy things to address in this particular chapter. The first thing that steps out to me, though, is verses 6 and 7, just because it talks about having the witnesses, right?
Right.
And just talking about, it should be on the evidence of 2 witnesses, right. Okay? And then there seems to be a process. That's right. What I kind of gleaned from that. And step 1 seemed to be that the process was that you had to have 2 witnesses. Okay, so that was step 1. And specifically, I'm pretty sure that this is talking about, is it about a man lying with a woman?
I don't think it's...
This one's not, right? Bring out a man.
Yeah, this was about someone doing evil in Israel and worshiping other gods and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so it's apostasy or idolatry. Okay. Yeah. So then, you had to have 2 witnesses, and then as a result of that, it seems that the first against him, the hand of the witness shall be the first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people, so you shall purge. So therefore, like we just talked about, you've got previous verses set up the judges and the officers, right? So now you've got someone that's transgressing the law, encouraging idolatry, which we know from Deuteronomy 13 is a big no-no.
Yeah. Right?
That's immediately you got to, address those people. And then you bring them before the judges. They apparently decide that the testimony of 2 people is valid. So then the witnesses have to be the ones that actually enact the judgment in that case, and then all the people together. So to me, it's very interesting because in this moment, this is, we're going to read here in a few more chapters in Deuteronomy 19 about falsely accusing somebody.
Yeah. So
this is very important that these 2 witnesses that come forward and they bring someone and say, hey, we've got someone here that's encouraging idolatry and we need to deal with this. They better absolutely be telling the truth, because if they're not, we're going to read in a few chapters later what happens to false accusers. And it is a serious deal.
If you better not accuse somebody of something if you're not ready to actually kill them, if you're not ready to actually stone them and take part in that.
Right.
I just think it just goes to show what a serious offense it is to falsely accuse.
That's right. And like I said, we're going to read what happens to those who falsely accuse, which is not a good deal, because you're already in the presence of people who are ready to stone, a mob apparently, a crowd of people who are ready to stone after the false accusers throw the first stone. Right. So then if they're figured out to be false, we'll read about it here in a few chapters, but that's interesting. So the big one. Here's the big one in this chapter, Deuteronomy 17:17.
Yeah.
What's this one about?
It's It's about that dirty word, polygamy.
That's right. Yeah, this one is basically
plural marriage.
Yeah, I know that. I think it's Deuteronomy 23 where it talks about if a man has 2 wives, and we see people likes to use that as a precedence to say that polygamy is okay. My lovely wife and I do not abide by the idea that polygamy is okay. No. We think that it's very simple example given to us by the Creator at creation. Yeah. He made a man and a woman, and just one of each. Yeah. And so as a result of that, he said, what did he say when he made Adam before Eve was made? He said, Adam was without a helpmate, and it was not good. Yeah. Right? It was not good that man was alone. At that point, did he make multiple wives?
Doesn't look like it.
No, and we don't ascribe to no Lilith pre-him before Eve and none of that Gnostic stuff. No, because that's not in the text. What the text tells us is that the Father looked at Adam and said, "It's not good he's alone." He made him one wife. Yeah,
it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Eve and Heather and Jackie.
And from that, he then, because remember everything that the Father was creating and the 6 days of creation. 6 days of creation. After he was done with everything, he said it's good. Yeah. But the only time he said it's not good is when Adam was alone. And then to remedy what was not good and make it good, he just gave him one woman. Yeah. Okay? So, unfortunately, there are people out there that they've come into the realization that the entire book is relevant for us today. So they've stepped out of a modern mainstream church mindset, and they've realized that all these words are applicable for our lives today. But while they're still studying out, they sometimes focus, very biasly on certain phrases and skip over entire context and portions of other phrases to support a very specific narrative of polygamy. And so Lindsay and I together, we do not subscribe to that. We don't agree with it. And we think that Deuteronomy 17 is a wonderful example of the Father encouraging us that that's not the ideal example, right? So he not only did he give us Adam, okay, so Adam was a king, being the first and the elder of all men. Yeah. And if we read the other sources in the apocryphal extra biblical books, we find out Adam was a king, right? And that means and Adam was considered righteous, that he followed God's ways. Yeah. So unless God just came up with a new rule, then in Deuteronomy 17:17, where it tells the kings to not multiply wives, right. Okay? So I've actually had some people try to debate me on this and say, well, he's not multiplying wives. 2 is not multiplied. And I'm like, yeah, if it's more than 1, you're multiplying.
Come on.
1 times 2 is 2. Or 1 even plus 1 is 2. So the point is that, you've multiplied beyond the singular 1 if you get 2. Right. Very simple concepts. But I just want to strongly encourage folks that we have a wonderful example given to the kings. I think that it's very important for us to grasp this idea that the king of Israel, even though during the days of Deuteronomy, they didn't have one yet. Yeah. The Father knew they were going to have one, so he's already given them laws ahead of time, knowing that they were going to,
call out we want to be like everybody else. Give us a king.
So he knew their hearts, obviously, and he knew they were going to appoint a king later. And it's actually, it fits wonderfully into the typology of the Messiah, who's our king, right? And will be king of Zion when the kingdom comes. And so the Father uses that typology, throughout the kings of Israel to speak idiomatically of the Messiah at different times, and that's fine. But one of the requirements of the king was they can only have one wife, and they weren't supposed to multiply horses as well, which is something interesting because we kind of see Solomon do both.
He did, but he also multiplied gold and silver to himself.
True.
He pretty much violated
every all of Deuteronomy 17:17. He
one
violates
of those commandments.
And people will use the justification saying, well, Jacob had more than one wife, and he was tricked into that. By the way,
into it, yeah. And if you actually read those stories, they aren't happy stories.
That's right.
There's a lot more wives, more problems. People it didn't seem like anyone was really enjoying that situation very much.
Yeah, Leah was constantly jealous of Rachel. Yeah. It was bad. And then of course Leah had a child first, and then Rachel was jealous, and it was just Even the practicality of all that just breaks my heart as far as...
Even if we go back to Abraham and Sarah, we have Sarah, coming up with this bright idea, and then she finally has Isaac, and then she totally despises Hagar, and poor Hagar is driven away.
Yeah. And Ishmael is driven away with, Hagar. And so Now he's separated from his father.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it creates chaos, and it was not the original design. So what's interesting to me is that a person can argue and try to debate for this concept that they think it's something just because there's no legitimate law to punish someone if they do it, right? So people say, well, God allows it, therefore it's okay. Well, God did allow it, you're right. There's some instances where it was allowed and no one's punished for having more than one wife. And that, some people have theorized that's just because of the caretaking involved of what happens according to the law, so that when you do take another wife, sometimes it was given to you by other people to take care of her. Unfortunately, there's provisions and rules about how you treat a wife you love and a wife you don't love, and the children that come from that. We read about that later. We'll probably get to that next week. Probably next week. But the point is, this is a subject that I feel needs to be rightly divided and carefully divided, because I just want to put a blanket statement down and say, from our opinion, the Torah does not promote multiple wives, does not promote polygamy at all.
Right.
It makes provision for when men do something not intended, but it does not. I mean, we've got a huge amount of rules in the instructions of God that are provisions for
He legislates all kinds of sins.
These different scenarios men get themselves into because of their unrighteousness.
Right.
He then gives them a remedy for that, how you deal with this problem later, now that you're in this situation.
Right.
But he never encourages you to go off and get into that situation to begin with.
Right.
So, but he tries to give you a remedy for it, and that's what I think we're seeing here. Now, as far as the kings, he's trying to encourage them right off the bat. If you're a king, you shouldn't have multiple wives, don't multiply money, don't multiply horses, and also you need to write out the Torah every year, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing, right? Not every year, but excuse me. You need to write out the Torah in the presence of the priests, and then he keeps that with him all the days of his life, and is supposed to read it all the days of his life. So the king himself was supposed to know these words. So when we see David multiply wives, and we see Solomon multiply wives, it was not intended. Right. They were actually breaking the command.
We also see it spoken of in the New Testament, and we see that we are admonished, people who are leaders in the church are admonished to be the husband of one wife. So you can tell even then there might have been some sort of a discussion going on that somehow this is justifiable. But as far as leadership in the the early church body, it was a flat out no, just like it is a flat out no right here. So people who say there's no law against it are clearly ignoring this here in Deuteronomy, and they're also ignoring everything in the New Testament that talks about it.
1 Timothy 2:3, I believe, is the first mention by Paul, talking about a deacon or elder should be a man of but one wife, sound doctrine. So he includes in the same phrase sound doctrine and one wife.
Yeah.
Also in Titus 1:6, I believe it's Titus 1:6, we have another mention of the same concept. A man, any leader in the church, he needs to be of one wife. He can't have multiple wives. So, because he's not a king, but he's a leader, he's an example.
Right.
So I think it's hilarious to try to say that someone could acknowledge the fact that we have leaders amongst the body, but yet somehow this rule doesn't apply to them.
Yeah.
And I just, I think it's bad, guys, and I would strongly discourage anyone who might be drawn into that trap to think it's okay. I would discourage you away from that.
Yeah.
Okay? Also, like I already mentioned, we talk about, how they had to write the law out every year.
Yes.
I don't know, I just think that's fun, because how many kings do we see in the history of Israel that do not know the law?
Yeah, it's a pretty consistent problem for them.
They seem to get high on their own power, right? And they run off into wickedness, and suddenly they're sacrificing poles to Asher and all these other people, these false gods, Molech, and we even see it with Solomon, who supposedly was the wisest one. Yeah. They had it, back in the day. So it just breaks my heart that this was a built-in safeguard, if you will, for them, that they were supposed to know the law, keep it with them, literally write it out themselves, which I think is fun. I actually may do that later in my life, and because I think that would be a great memorabilia to have for my own life. Yeah. And there's something powerful when you're right. There's something really powerful there. But if we look into the kingdom of God, what's going to happen at the resurrection? What are we promised in Jeremiah 31, verse 33 through 34? Ezekiel 36, right? What are we promised? Is that the Spirit will put the law of God in our heart at the resurrection, right? We're raised with incorruptible bodies. We have a new spiritual body now with a heart made of flesh, as it's talked about, And then Jeremiah 31, 34 says, all of us within the resurrected kingdom of God and living inside the New Jerusalem, we're all going to know the Lord from the least to the greatest. Everyone's going to have the law written on your heart. Deuteronomy 30, verse 6, that God has circumcised our hearts for us. Right now, we're learning His law. Right, that's what we're reading in Deuteronomy 17. The king was supposed to learn it, write it down, learn it in the presence of the priest, so that he's writing it down properly, so that he's learning it properly, okay? That's called discipleship. That's called sanctification. We're learning His word, His truth. It's washing our minds with the water of the word so that we get better and better and better at following His righteous ways. But at the resurrection, we're taken into the New Jerusalem in our new bodies with a heart that is promised to be circumcised by God, have His law. All of this stuff we're reading instinctively will be in our heart to do it without fail. Okay, so that's why it says that we, in Enoch chapter 5, verse 69, it talks about how we'll never sin again. Because of the promise at the resurrection. So I think this is wonderful because, we're considered a royal priesthood at the resurrection.
We'll be a nation of kings and priests.
Right. So we need to have the law and know the law, just like the king of Israel was instructed to know the law in front of the priests who were supposed to know the law. Yeah. Right, according to Malachi 2. So wonderful, wonderful future pointing towards the fulfillment of all this in the kingdom of God, all right, in the New Jerusalem. What else, sweetie? What else is in this chapter? It's a fun one. Was that the majority of the things that we wanted to talk about? Majority.
One thing I wanted to point out is that some people use... so some people use verses... Basically, they use verses 8 through... 11, that's basically laying out the whole situation of having judges. Mm-hmm. A lot of people these days who come into the Torah walk get sucked into the ditch on the other side of the narrow path we call Judaism, and they apply these verses to the modern Sanhedrin. And so basically what they do is say that those guys are still the authority that's laid out here when it's clearly stated it's the Levitical priests or the judge who's in office in those days. So without the Levitical priesthood, without an actual legitimate nation of Israel that the Father himself has gathered over there, we don't have these judges. So I just want to point that out to some people that the Sanhedrin is not our authority, and I just want people to understand that
the modern day Sanhedrin.
Yes,
and we're also talking about people that are practicing Judaism.
Exactly,
too, right? Okay,
people who don't accept our Messiah.
Yeah.
So if you're going along with this notion that there's some sort of authority to the Sanhedrin, that's not contextual, guys. It's not accurate, and you shouldn't be taking. You shouldn't be taking orders from anyone who denies the Messiah. I mean, other than outside in our lives, like if you're at work and your boss tells you go on break, listen to your boss. But
you should not be getting your doctrine from someone that denies Messiah.
Exactly.
Okay? Your spiritual instruction, your discipleship, your doctrine of any kind. If they denied Messiah, we are told in the New Testament, and the bulk of the context of the Old, right? Our Messiah is our high priest.
Yeah.
The high priest is where we get our spiritual instruction. That was the point of the priest. They were supposed to be the mouthpiece of God to the people. Yeah. We have that in the Son of Man, Yeshua of Nazareth, our Messiah. He is our high priest, okay? He receives our confession, 1 John 1:9. He mediates between man and God in 1 Timothy 2:5. All of Hebrews explains that he is now before the Father, making atonement for us, so that he can raise us at the resurrection, right, to be like him, who was the first fruits of that resurrection. And that high priest is the one that was prophesied by God and then appointed by God upon his resurrection. Right. So if you reject the one that God's appointed for you, the anointed one, which is Yeshua, the Messiah, the whole purpose of the Messiah was he was the capital A anointed one, right, above all the other prophets. And if you reject him, and above all the other priests, that's why he's called the high priest. Right? And he's called the high priest of an order of priesthoods that was even greater than Levites. Right. Okay? That's why he can minister in the Father's temple above the firmament. So if you've rejected that authority structure, you have rejected Torah.
Yeah.
That's that simple.
Yeah.
So if there's a man who claims that he follows a Talmudic Judaism, and he's trying to say that, well, our current Sanhedrin tells you how to interpret the Torah.
Yeah.
It tells you how to think. No, guys. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's been indoctrinated into a different religion, and he's not actually keeping Torah like he thinks he is. And it's heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
Because there are people that want to know God, but they are grown up in a culture in the last 40 to 50 years of modern day Judaism, and they're not keeping the commandments, and they're not accepting the Messiah as a prophet of God, much less their high priest who mediates for them to God. So that's why they're trying to build a temple again and get more Levites from Ethiopia and fly them in, and they're trying to recreate some of the circumstances that they saw in days of old. But God's already given them an answer for it. So they're just rejecting it. So I would strongly discourage taking your cues of theology or doctrine from them at all.
Yeah.
Okay? All right.
Okay.
Let's. I'll just pick up with 18, and we'll just continue reading. All right. So chapter 18. The Levitical priests, the whole tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the Lord's offerings by fire and his portion. They shall have no inheritance among their countrymen. The Lord is their inheritance, as he promised them. Now this shall be the priest's due from the people, from those who offer a sacrifice, either an ox or a sheep, of which they shall give to the priest the shoulder, and the 2 cheeks, and the stomach. You shall give him the first fruits of your grain, your new wine, and your oil, and the first shearing of your sheep. For the Lord your God has chosen him and his sons from all your tribes to stand and serve in the name of the Lord forever. Now, if a Levite comes from any of your towns throughout Israel where he resides, and he comes whenever he desires to the place which the Lord chooses, then he shall serve in the name of the Lord his God, like all his fellow Levites who stand there before the Lord. They shall eat equal portions, except what they receive from the sale of their father's estates. And when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, or one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice. For those nations, let me back up to 13. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your countrymen. You shall listen to him. This is accordance to all that you asked of the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God. Let me not see this great fire any more, or I will die. The Lord said to me, They have spoken well. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you. I will put my words in his mouth. He shall speak to them all that I command him. It shall come about that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who speaks a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. You may say in your heart, How will we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. All right, that's chapter 18. What's on your mind, sweetie? There's some fun stuff that popped out to me.
Well, for me, I think what I noticed is that I never kind of realized that there's more than just the Deuteronomy 13 test. Right. Apparently, there's also a Deuteronomy 18 test, and there's some different things going on in here with this false prophet. And
that's right. It's basically whatever they say, right, and it doesn't come true, then we have they've spoken presumptuously, and the Lord did not say it. So that's the quick way to figure it out, right? Now, if we juxtapose this with Deuteronomy 13, that one was about what?
Idolatry, leading people into worshiping other gods.
That was. But what was the mechanism by which they tried to do that was a sign or a lying wonder. Even if they did a sign that came true, yet they encourage you to actually stop following the commandments of Yahweh, they were an idolater, right? That was then considered a lying sign.
And they were to be stoned to death.
They were.
Right?
So the Deuteronomy 13 false prophet idea, which the context accompanied it by a sign, if they prove to be false, and they encourage you to worship other gods, you were to stone them.
Yeah.
But this one here, it just says if someone tries to be a prophet and they speak something that doesn't actually happen, it wasn't from God. It doesn't say to stone them. It just says, don't be afraid of them.
Yeah.
Don't
listen to them.
Brush them off.
Blow them off. Yeah.
Because they're not actually speaking from the Lord.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, I've went to a lot of church in my life, okay? I went to a lot of church, guys.
I'm so sorry.
And I've sat in a lot of services. And it wasn't, it wasn't when earlier in my life. It was more like in my young adult life. I sat in a lot of services where people just want to randomly prophesy something. Mm. And not only could I not discern what they were even trying to say, because it was like word salad, but what they did say, you couldn't test it to even see if it come true anyway. It wasn't anything concrete. It wasn't anything that actually let you know, okay, I can test those words came true. The Lord spoke. Yeah. I was blessed because of it, right? No, they just, the only time that it ever happened to me where someone said something that absolutely did come true, and they said it, I don't even know if I would call them a prophetess, because this was kind of like a gift of the Spirit we see in the New Testament. It's explained in the New Testament. I would contend that it was around a lot longer than that, but it was kind of like a word of knowledge, right? So I was going through a rough time. It was during college, and I was actually going through a small amount of persecution from people I was living with, because I was trying to I was trying to change my behavior and trying to learn more about the Bible. And the people that I were living with, the roommates, they weren't trying to do that. They were trying to be typical college kids, right? And so they actually asked me to leave the apartment. They wanted me to move out. So I was stressed out, trying to figure out what am I going to do. I go to church with my dad, and a random lady I've never met before walks up to me after the service and says, "The Lord wanted me to tell you that it's going to be okay, and He has a new house He's going to get you in." Right? I never met this lady before, never talked to her afterwards. 20 seconds of interaction, that's all she said. And she went on. Well, within a week or two, some other people I was going to church with, some other guys, they asked me if everything was okay. I kind of shared my idea for them. They're like, "Well, hey, we got extra space. You want to come live with us?" So my roommate situation got cured like that. It's not the biggest trouble in the world, but for me at the time, it would cause me great stress, and the Lord worked it out. And He encouraged me through a lady speaking, a type of prophecy to me, with a gift of the Spirit. So that was great. But that's one out of like 1,000 occasions.
Yeah. Where
I've sat in church and I've heard countless quote unquote prophecies, never came true, were so vague you couldn't test them to anyway. You would never know if they were true anyway. So as Deuteronomy 18 is telling us, if that's happening, don't fear them.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm guessing this context of fearing them is basically saying, don't let them have any weight over you.
Yeah.
Don't let them really steer you or guide you or discourage you from something. If you're not going to fear them, then, like I would say, just brush it off and move on, and that was not a word from the Lord. That's a pretty easy way to test it, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, and I would say to act in love and not just say you're a false prophet.
Yeah, I think that's I think that
go, right? Because there's no penalty, right?
Yeah.
Even if there were a penalty, you're not a Levite judge or a priest, okay, to enact judgment. So this is where we love people, and we encourage them to keep studying the Word so that they can rightly divide and rightly walk it out. Right. But we just don't want to start, lambasting people with, "Oh, you're a false prophet and heretic."
The one thing I wanted to mention real quick before we move on to chapter 19 is here in verse 10 and 11. So we have, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead." So when we were doing our study on this, we did look into the Hebrew to see how solid of a case we could make from the Hebrew, which wasn't as solid as I would like to just say, "Oh, here's what this word means in Hebrew." But in this verse, and in all translations of this verse, we have a list of practices that people do that are not allowed in Israel. And this here, this separation between a medium or a spiritist or one who calls up the dead, that's pretty much across the board. In all the translations, we see one who calls up the dead as this is a separate act from what these spiritists are doing and what these mediums are doing. And the reason I bring this up is there is a pretty ongoing debate. It's been going on for quite a long time about whether or not souls are literally in Sheol, sleeping, waiting for the resurrection, and whether or not those souls can be called up from Sheol and consulted. And obviously, on the one side of the camp, there's the people who say, no, it's not possible at all. It will never happen. It never could happen. And the example of it happening in Samuel, where Samuel himself is called up, that wasn't Samuel. That was a familiar spirit, and it's only the witches are just talking to familiar spirits.
Yeah, just putting on a big show.
Exactly.
That's what the detractors of this topic try to claim.
Exactly.
Right?
But the Father very clearly makes a commandment against calling up the dead specifically, and being a medium, and being a spiritist.
So wait a minute. Does that mean does God make commands against stuff that's not possible?
That was the whole point I had every time I've ever debated this with somebody, is why would he make a commandment against it if it wasn't possible? The reason I wanted to be able to look at the Hebrew, and just be able to point right to it and say, look, there's a difference between a necromancer and a medium, is because I don't want to have to use my experiential evidence to talk about it, just because as someone who... some of you know my testimony that I spent most of my life as a New Age occultist, and I know from that side of things there is a difference between a medium and someone who calls up the dead, a necromancer. There's a difference between that, and someone who is a medium isn't necessarily someone who calls up spirits of the dead, and someone who is a necromancer isn't necessarily someone who consults familiar spirits. Now, New Age mediums might be deceived by Satan into thinking that they're talking to spirits of the dead, but they're not. They are talking, that is true. They're not talking to your dead relatives. They are talking to unclean spirits.
That's right.
I functioned in that gift when I was a New Ager, and I thought I was talking to ghosts of my dead friends and stuff like that, and I wasn't. But the Father makes a very clear distinction here between someone who is practicing these things involved in being a medium and someone who's doing something as far as calling up spirits of the dead. So I just wanted to point out that I don't know how you can get around that there's an actual commandment against calling up the spirits of the dead and try to say that that's just not something he would ever allow, when Father... Because we have this free will, free agency, whatever people want to call it, because we have the ability to make a choice, there are things that happen in this world that the Father does not like, but he allows because it's our choice. He doesn't like abortion, but we all know it's the epidemic of our time. So we can't just use our human logic and say, oh, well, he would never allow something like that to happen. Well, why would he make he doesn't allow it as far as what he says is righteous and is okay. It's a sin.
He made a commandment, thou shalt not murder, but yet Stalin killed 20 million people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, did God allow that?
Right.
So the point is, that's a very uneducated argument, is what I would say.
Yeah.
It's kind of a fear-based argument that's very, very biased. The point being, the Father gave us a commandment to not do this stuff because it's possible.
Right.
Right. He just doesn't just waste our time with instructions for things that we can never accomplish.
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, he'd be saying, "Thou shalt not put a red Tesla in space." So anyway,
moving on.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting about that passage is that because the debate usually goes immediately to 1 Samuel 28, right? With the whole witch of Endor calling up Samuel.
It literally happened.
Nowhere in that text from all of chapter 28, right? And then the fulfillment of that, I believe, is in chapter 30, where the spirit of Samuel, what he actually told Saul during that whole event came true.
Yeah, give a
later,
true prophecy.
Right? So therefore, he matches what the words that came from the spirit that was conjured up at that time, that called itself Samuel, that Saul thought was Samuel, that the witch was scared right?
that he got her to commit this great sin.
If you're writing a story and you're the Father communicating his scripture and truth to us, you've got all three characters who think it's Samuel.
Yeah.
Okay? Samuel, the spirit talking, called himself Samuel. Saul thought it was Samuel. The witch thought it was Samuel. Nowhere in the text does it say it wasn't Samuel, or that was just a familiar spirit impersonating Samuel. It would have said that. If that's otherwise, we've got an entire chapter leading us astray and thinking something's possible.
Right.
And that if it was an unclean spirit, the words came true later.
Yeah.
And therefore he'd pass the Deuteronomy 18 test. It's horrible, right? No, the text is clear. It calls it Samuel repeatedly and doesn't negate it ever. And then the words of Samuel during that time come true later in the events of Saul's life. And we even have, the book of Sirach? There's an apocryphal book that used to be in the Bible that's taken out, actually mentions this specific event in 1 Samuel 28.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think it's
And
Ecclesiasticus.
I think they call it Sirach.
Okay,
Sorry,
okay.
some of the apocryphal books have two names. But yeah, Ecclesiasticus or Sirach mentions the idea that the spirit of Samuel was brought up and actually gave a correct prophecy about the end of Saul's life. So you've got a second testimony, Anyway, I think it's interesting that I just want to first draw the dichotomy between the two different types of tests in Deuteronomy 13, Deuteronomy 18. Okay, this particular one does not have a punishment involved in it.
Right.
It just says basically ignore them.
Yeah.
Right? They're not speaking for God, so just ignore them. Don't pay any attention. Anyway, it's great insight, sweetie. I really, appreciate you. So, do you want to start with chapter 19? Are we on 19 now?
I think it's your turn to read. I think I read 18.
All right, sweetie. Nope, I read 18.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Okay.
you should read 19.
All right. When the Lord your God cuts off the nations whose land the Lord your God gives you, and you dispossess them and settle in their cities and in their houses, you shall set aside 3 cities for yourself in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God gives you to possess. You shall prepare the roads for yourself and divide into 3 parts the territory of your land, which the Lord your God will give you as a possession, so that any manslayer may flee there. Now this is the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live. When he kills his friend unintentionally, not hating him previously, as when a man goes into the forest with his friend to cut wood, and his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, and the iron head slips off the handle and strikes his friend so that he dies, he may flee to one of these cities and live. Otherwise, the Avenger of Blood might pursue the manslayer in the heat of his anger and overtake him, because the way is long, and take his life, though he was not deserving of death, since he had not hated him previously. Therefore I command you, saying, you shall set aside 3 cities for yourself. If the Lord your God enlarges your territory, just as he has sworn to your fathers, and gives you all the land which he promised to give to your fathers, if you carefully observe all this commandment which I command you today, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in his ways always, then you shall add 3 more cities for yourself besides these 3. So innocent blood will not be shed in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, and blood guiltness be upon you. But if there is a man who hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and rises up against him and strikes him so that he dies, and he flees to one of these cities, then the elders of this city shall send and take him from there and deliver him into the hand of the Avenger of Blood, that he may die. You shall not pity him, but you shall purge the blood of the innocent from Israel, that it may go well with you. You shall not move your neighbor's boundary mark, which the ancestors have set in your inheritance, which you will inherit in the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess. A single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses a matter shall be confirmed. If a malicious witness rises up against a man to accuse him of wrongdoing, then both the men who have the dispute shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges who will be in office in those days. The judges shall investigate thoroughly, and if the witness is a false witness and he has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him just as he had intended to do to his brother. Thus you shall purge the evil from among you. The rest will hear and be afraid, and will never again do such an evil thing among you. Thus you shall show no pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot.
Wow. Okay.
That's a mouthful.
Manslayer, Avenger of Blood, interesting terms. I really think these are fascinating. Now, what is it? Exodus 22, 21, something like that. We first mentioned we get the Avenger of Blood.
Yeah.
And what I love about this, personally, is that the bulk of the first part of 19 that you read, where I think it's verses 1 through 13ish or whatever,
Yeah.
but it talks about the manslayer if he's innocent. Okay, so if there's an accidental death, which what modern day we would call manslaughter, I believe, and there was no ill intent, right? So he's considered, it was an accident basically. Okay, your ox got out of control, and I don't know, something happened and you killed somebody, or swinging an axe and the head of the axe falls off and hits somebody in the face, and you accidentally kill somebody, you get a fair running start from the Avenger of Blood, because they were supposed to take these refuge cities, and as it says, what was that in verse 4? I think it was maybe it's verse 3. You shall prepare the roads for yourself and divide it into 3 parts the territory of your land, which the Lord your God will give you as a possession, so that any manslayer may flee there. Okay, so when you're building a city and you're building, neighboring cities around it, this is actually asking them to engineer the road systems so that the distance between between the cities around the refuge city would be equal distances. So that the manslayer doesn't have to run too far in order to get to the refuge city, right? Giving the Avenger of Blood time to catch up with him. Mm-hmm. So in my little fanciful mind, I'm imagining a dude running, with his cloak flying behind him, and the Avenger of Blood is like 100 yards behind him, like running after him with a knife in hand. He's like, I'm going to get you that day you kill my cousin, right? And so, you know what I'm saying? And he's just like, that's his job, the Avenger of Blood. Some of the nearest kin was dedicated to take out the murderer. But because this guy's innocent, he gets to flee and live out the rest of his life in some other city of refuge, which I think is wonderful, right? That's an amazing thing of mercy. And they were supposed to intentionally design the roads so that it was equally divided between the areas around it. So this guy didn't have to run too far to get to safety. This is your first example of a safe place. So it's just, you've got
a legitimate safe place.
Yes, a biblical safe place, right? Not just a political coward safe place. But yeah, your legitimate safe place was this refuge city, and they were supposed to. That means there's a lot of effort taken, in my opinion, to design the roads so that there was equal distances and parts for the cities around it. Yeah. Which takes thought, which takes a community effort, which takes planning, which means that you've got the community involved in protecting the innocent. Yeah. So that, who knows, maybe the man who's helping lay down the road systems or clear out the path that they would call a road from one city to another to make sure it was, they were in equal parts, right, divided around the refuge city. Maybe in the future, one of his kin is accidentally killed and he becomes the Avenger of Blood. He has that experience now that he had to set up those roads for the guy he's supposed to go after to have an equal distance to get to the refuge city. So that's running in the back of his mind. That whole act of mercy from the community is running in the back of his mind, just in case. Other people, we're talking about
accidentally kill somebody.
Well, babe, this is like human nature here, okay? You accidentally kill some dude, right? Well, you know how they say you mess with the wrong dude, right? You mess with the wrong hombre. So maybe that hombre had a bunch of cousins, right? And they live on the outskirts of the city, and you're trying to get to the refuge city. Well, they just want to come out and block the path for you, or they want to detain you, right?
So that the Avenger, some bad hombres.
That's right. They want to detain you. So what would the Hebrew version of bad hombres be?
I don't know.
A bunch of Akis? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. You call them like a little gang of Asher Akis. I don't know what you would call them, but say you're in one of the cities of Asher, and the family members all hear about this. Oh my gosh, Jacob over on Primrose Valley, he accidentally killed Natsir's cousin, and then all of Natsir takes all of his cousins, and they go out to the rest of the cousins, and they go out to the road where he's trying to flee the refuge city and block him from going, so the Avenger of Blood can catch up to him. I'm just saying that would be practical, real world vengeance, right? But if people as a community were already involved in actually literally physically engineering their cities so that it was equally parts around the refuge city, it gives them a different mindset. It gives them a totally different heart to understand there was a reason we did this, because this guy might be innocent, right? And that's why we get the later verses where there's an investigation, right? Maybe he's not innocent. And if he's not, the refuge city, he has no refuge there, right? He's pulled out by the elders, and he has to face the Avenger of Blood. And I just think that, to me, it's just the little stuff like this in the Torah. I just think it's fascinating, babe. I think it's fascinating because what I see in the prophets, when we look at the New Jerusalem, and it says that all the people are going to camp outside and around the big city of the New Jerusalem. To me, this is a perfect setup, a perfect model for structural civil engineering, if you will, so that if this law could be applied, the big city might possibly be the city of refuge. That is equal distance from all the cities around it that are flourishing in the millennial reign.
Maybe. I mean,
it's possible. It's an idea.
We still have the whole earth, yes, people are going to populate the whole entire earth. So we might be a little far from, as the population grows, but there will be other sanctuary cities.
I'm sure.
This is the original sanctuary city. So
yes. Well, there were 6 designated, back in the day in the land of Israel. But in the future, who knows if there'll be more designated.
Well, he says if territory expands, you build more cities of refuge.
Yes, that's right. So anyway, I don't know. I geeked out on it because I think it's fun. And but there's more in this chapter. And like we talked about in the first chapter, 17, It's about the false witness, right?
Yeah, well, we see what
The
happens.
false accuser.
We see whatever that false accuser was intending to do to the person they were falsely accusing. That's going to happen to them. So, most likely, if you were, picking up your stones and getting ready, and it turns out that they find out you were falsely accusing, then you're going to have to hand those stones over to everybody else to throw them at you.
Yeah,
So.
that's just, you better have your case ready.
Yeah.
You can't just start throwing out, this guy did this, and he needs to be killed for it, because if you could be killed that same day.
Yeah,
So
he
that's
who's
serious
without
charge.
sin cast that first stone.
Yeah, that's a serious charge right there. So I love it because it's a built-in safety feature for the falsely accused.
Right.
A fear-based feature that people can't just go around, bearing false witness, because there's something involved. All right, now in chapter 20, I think this is our last chapter in this portion.
Yeah, I think we go 1 through 9. Let me just double
the first
check
9
real
verses?
quick. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh no, it's through 21:9.
Oh, to 21:9?
So we do
Okay.
go
I'll
through
just
20.
I'll read 20 real quick.
Okay.
Chapter 20. When you go out to battle against your enemies and see horses and chariots and people more numerous than you, do not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, who brought you up from the land of Egypt, is with you. When you are approaching the battle, the priest shall come near and speak to the people. He shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, you are approaching the battle against your enemies today. Do not be faint-hearted, do not be afraid or panic or tremble before them, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. The officers also shall speak to the people, saying, Who is the man that has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him depart and return to his house. Otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would dedicate it. Who is the man that has planted a vineyard and has not begun to use its fruit? Let him depart and return to his house. Otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would begin to use its fruit. Who is the man that is engaged to a woman and has not married her? Let him depart and return to his house. Otherwise he might die in the battle, and another man would marry her. Then the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Who is the man that is afraid and faint-hearted? Let him depart and return to his house, so that he might not make his brother's hearts melt like his heart. When the officers have finished speaking to the people, they shall appoint commanders of armies at the head of the people. When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. If it agrees to make peace with you and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall become your forced labor and shall serve you. However, if it does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. Only the women and the children and the animals, and all that is in the city, all its spoil, you shall take as booty for yourself. And you shall use the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not the cities of these nations nearby. Only in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance you shall not leave alive anything that breathes, but you shall utterly destroy them, the Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that they may not teach you to do according to all their detestable things which they have done for their gods, so that you would sin against the Lord your God. When you besiege a city a long time, to make war against it in order to capture it, you shall not destroy its trees by swinging an axe against them, for you may eat from them. You shall not cut them down, for is the tree of the field a man, that it should be besieged by you? Only the trees which you know are not fruit trees you shall destroy and cut down, that you may construct siege works against the city that is making war with you until it falls. All right, it's chapter 20. We get rules for warfare, basically. It's pretty fascinating. I love the fact that it talks about the tree, like don't cut down the fruit trees. It's kind of a practical, don't take a food source away from the land. Yeah. Not just for the people, probably for the animals as well. And then, it's kind of concept of if you go to a city, try to make peace first, right? That's what it offers first. And then if they want to rebel against you, then, then destroy them, But what's interesting to me is that the very beginning of the chapter is basically a list of things. It says the priest is supposed to go out before they go to battle. The priest goes out to the army, and he makes a proclamation, right?
Excuse me.
He says, has anyone, just built a house, planted a vineyard, got engaged? Yeah. Those three things, any of that? Okay, well, leave, go back and enjoy those things, right? And then he says, further, if you're afraid, go home. And I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
You don't see that in militaries today in any nation. And in fact, in some of the more dramatic conquest or battles and wars in history, you've got, people fleeing the battle lines only to be killed by their own soldiers as deserters as they're fleeing.
Yeah, it's very well known. Russia in World War II.
Yeah.
That was their policy. Is if you there was like one gun for every 5 soldiers, so it was natural for a lot of these people who were just conscripted into the army, who didn't even have weapons, to want to run. But the penalty was you were shot. You were shot if you fled. Yeah. It's a terrible mentality to have.
And some of these guys
battles.
are like 18 years old guys. Yeah. You know what I mean? So the father, even during bad stuff like battles, right, in war, the father has these provisions built in that even if you're just afraid, right, you can just go home and fight again another day, so to speak, right? So I think it's fascinating to me that that's just he doesn't force anybody to do anything. If you're, he wants to go and make war against the Jebusites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, these other nations they want to drive out of land, he's bringing the army up there. He's not going to make you do it. So basically what's left is those who want to be there. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I just think that this is a piece of information that could be overlooked because people, they want to use these battles in the Old Testament for the fodder for atheists and for people that criticize Scripture and they criticize Yahweh in the Scriptures and His decisions, and they never talk about this part, right? They never talk about the fact that He didn't make anyone even fight for Him, And so it's all about willingness. He wants your heart in it. He doesn't want to make you do anything because He's a good Father, as Jesus said, right? He's a good Father. All right, so let's finish the last few verses of 21. I think it's the first 9 verses.
Yeah.
If you'll read that real quick, and then we'll jump to our pairings.
Okay. If a slain person is found lying in the open country in the land which the Lord your God gives you to possess, and it is not known who has struck him, then your elders and your judges shall go out and measure the distance to the cities which are around the slain one. It shall be that the city which is nearest to the slain man, that is, the elders of that city, shall take a heifer of the herd which has not been worked and which has not pulled in a yoke, and the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water which has not been plowed or sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for the Lord your God has chosen them to serve Him and to bless in the name of the Lord, and every dispute and every assault shall be settled by them, by the Levites. All the elders of that city which is nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley, and they shall answer and say, Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it. Forgive your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, O Lord, and do not place the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, and the blood guiltless shall be forgiven them. So you shall remove the guilt of innocent blood from your midst when you do what is right in the eyes of the Lord.
Wow. Fun.
Yeah, so just want to reiterate, it's the Levites that are doing the judging. It's the Levites who were authority, and whoever these Sanhedrin guys are, they're not Levites. So I just want to point that out.
Right, yeah, the modern Sanhedrin today. Yeah, that's right.
All right,
so our first pairing, we actually, as you know, if you've already seen some of our other kingdom portions, we try to do a small pairing from the Torah itself. We talk about this term, the Torah. It's a Hebrew word that means instructions, but culturally, in modern day, people have used the word Torah to mean the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And so we just found, I think it's Numbers 35. Mm-hmm. We found
35.
A little pairing for what we just read out of Deuteronomy.
Yeah. And specifically what we paired this to is Deuteronomy 19 verses 1 through 21. So basically the pairing from the Torah just adds some context. Yeah. Because we love context here at Kingdom in Context. So starting in verse 6 in chapter 35 of Numbers, the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall be the 6 cities of refuge, which you shall give for the manslayer to flee to, and in addition to them you shall give 42 cities. All the cities which you shall give to the Levites shall be 48 cities, together with their pasture lands. As for the cities which you shall give from the possession of the sons of Israel, you shall take more from the larger, and you shall take less from the smaller. Each shall give some of his cities to the Levites in proportion to his possession which he inherits. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, When you cross the Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall select for yourselves cities to be your cities of refuge, that the manslayer who has killed any person unintentionally may flee there. The cities shall be to you as a refuge from the avenger, so that the manslayer will not die until he stands before the congregation for trial. The cities which you are to give shall be your 6 cities of refuge. You shall give 3 cities across the Jordan and 3 cities in the land of Canaan. They are to be cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the sons of Israel, and for the alien, and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there. But if he struck him down with an iron object so that he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. If he struck him down with a stone in the hand, by which he will die, and as a result he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. Or if he struck him with a wooden object in the hand, by which he might die, and as a result he died, he is a murderer. The murderer shall surely be put to death. The blood avenger himself shall put the murderer to death. He shall put him to death when he meets him. If he pushed him of hatred, or threw something at him lying in wait, and as a result he died, or if he struck him down with his hand in enmity, and as a result he died, the one who struck him shall surely be put to death. He is a murderer. The blood avenger shall put the murderer to death when he meets him. But if he pushed him suddenly without enmity, or threw something at him without lying in wait, or with any deadly object of stone, and without seeing it dropped on him so that he died, while he was not his enemy nor seeking his injury, then the congregation shall judge between the slayer and the blood avenger according to these ordinances. The congregation shall deliver the manslayer from the hand of the blood avenger, and the congregation shall restore him to his city of refuge to which he fled, and he shall live in it until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the manslayer at any time goes beyond the border of his city of refuge to which he may flee, and the blood avenger finds him outside the border of his city of refuge, and the blood avenger kills the manslayer, he will not be guilty of blood, because he should have remained in his city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, the manslayer shall return to the land of his possession. These things shall be for a statutory ordinance to you throughout your generations in all your dwellings. If anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death at the evidence of witnesses, but no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. Moreover, you shall not take ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall surely be put to death. You shall not take ransom for him who has fled to his city of refuge, that he may return to live in the land before the death of the priest. So you shall not pollute the land in which you are, for blood pollutes the land, and no expiation can be made for the land for the blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell, for I, the Lord, am dwelling in the midst of the sons of Israel. So I think it's obvious.
Yeah. The reason we chose that, because it expounds on the manslayer and the Avenger of Blood.
Right.
We see there's 6 cities, not just 3. We see where those cities are placed on opposite sides of the Jordan. We see that there's actual trial involved. Yeah. So it's not just, the manslayer just starts running.
Well, and we also see the cities of refuge are cities of the Levites. Yes. So it makes perfect sense, because they're the ones that are supposed to be doing the investigating and the judging. There you go. There. So it brings the investigation close and home. And then of course it goes through the whole idea of the spiritual implication of the land not being defiled and things like that. So there's a lot more context there. All right, next would be, we're going to do a pairing from the prophets, and the first thing that we chose was Ezekiel 44. And it's we paired it up because it matched up with what we read in Deuteronomy 17, and then also in Deuteronomy 18. So we're going to jump over real quick to Ezekiel 44, verses 14 through 34. All right, so Ezekiel 44:14. Yet I will appoint them to keep charge of the house, of all its service, and of all that shall be done in it. But the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, who kept charge of my sanctuary when the sons of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood, declares the Lord God. They shall enter my sanctuary. They shall come near to my table to minister to me and keep my charge. It shall be that when they enter at the gates of the inner court, they shall be clothed with linen garments, and wool shall not be on them, while they are ministering in the gates of the inner court and in the house. Linen turbans shall be on their heads, and linen undergarments shall be on their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything which makes them sweat. When they go out into the outer court, to the people, they shall put off their garments in which they have been ministering, and lay them in the holy chambers. Then they shall put on the other garments, so that they will not transmit holiness to the people with their garments. Also they shall not shave their heads, yet they shall not let their locks grow long. They shall only trim the hair of their heads, nor shall any of the priests drink wine when they enter the inner court. And they shall not marry a widow or a divorced woman, but shall take virgins from the offspring of the house of Israel, or a widow who is the widow of a priest. Moreover, they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the profane, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean. In a dispute they shall take their stand to judge. They shall judge it according to my ordinances. They shall also keep my laws and my statutes and all my appointed feasts and sanctify my Sabbaths. They shall not go to a dead person to defile themselves. However, for father, for mother, for son, for daughter, for brother, or for sister who has not had a husband, they may defile themselves. After he is cleansed, 7 days shall elapse for him. On the day that he goes into the sanctuary and to the inner court to minister in the sanctuary, he shall offer his sin offering, declares the Lord God. And it shall be with regard to an inheritance for them that I am their inheritance, and you shall give them no possession in Israel. I am their possession. They shall eat the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, and every devoted thing in Israel shall be theirs. The first of all the firstfruits of every kind, and every contribution of every animal from all your contributions shall be for the priests. You shall also give to the priests the first of your dough to cause a blessing to rest on your house. The priest shall not eat any bird or beast that has died a natural death, or beast that has died a natural death or has been torn to pieces. And
that's it.
Okay, we had till 34, but I guess it's just a 31.
Just a typo, I think. That's my fault. All right. Okay. What did we get out of that?
Well, so what I want people to understand is, and I probably should have explained this before I started reading, is that Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48 are kingdom. The context of them is kingdom millennial reign. So what it's talking about here is the new Levite priests that we're told in Isaiah 66 are going to be chosen. These are the things that they're going to be doing. And we paired that because it's showing that they're still in charge of judging disputes. They're still in charge of lawsuits. They're still doing everything that's laid out for them in Deuteronomy.
That's right.
When we are resurrected, Levites that are going to be chosen aren't going to be chosen from the resurrected saints, because the Levitical priesthood is, as people would understand it, the earthly priesthood.
Which would be outside of the New Jerusalem.
Right.
Because inside of the New Jerusalem is called the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
Okay.
So the new Levites in the kingdom, they're going to be judging and doing all these things for the mortal survivors of the day of the Lord who live outside of the New Jerusalem, who need to come and keep the feasts and keep the law and learn the law and bring their sin offerings and all that stuff. So just so people understand, Ezekiel isn't just talking about times past. This is future talk. So.
Yeah, it's a large portion at the end of the book of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And, we're just giving you a glimpse because this is Kingdom in Context, and as we talk about the Torah portions through the lens of how this applies to the millennial reign, Messiah is our king in the kingdom, we just want people to be aware of this idea that these instructions are reading for the priests and how they delegate different parts of their duty in the book of Deuteronomy, and also in Leviticus and everywhere we see anything given to the priests, right? This whole Torah in general is going to be on our hearts as resurrected saints. But as far as the new Levites that are chosen, as prophesied to us in the millennial reign, they're still going to be doing the same law, right? The same law, the same duties. But they'll be doing it for the survivors, okay? Oh, and Sweetie, also, by the way, we wanted to pair up just a small bit from the book of 1 Kings, because remember we read about in Deuteronomy 17, we're talking about the rules for the king, right? He wasn't supposed to multiply wives, money, or horses, okay? But we actually see King Solomon disobey all of that. So
it's pretty infamous for it, in fact.
Pretty infamous. I think the first place we're going to be reading from is 1 Kings chapter 10 and then verse 26. And it says, "Now Solomon gathered chariots and horses, and he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, and he stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem." So what's interesting to me is that he had so many horses, he built cities for them.
Yeah,
they're called chariot
crazy.
cities, okay? And guys, this is actually an archaeological documented fact. Several years ago, I met a man that was an archaeologist, and he had gone on expeditions in Israel during the 70s and 80s. One of his expeditions during the early 70s was in northern Israel, right against the border of Syria, along this mountain region area, where they actually found a chariot city, like we just heard mentioned here, with on the pillars that they were digging up, right, of this ancient structures, was the Seal of Solomon. And as they further excavated everything on this archaeological dig, they discovered that this was a chariot city of Solomon from the days and the reign of Solomon. Okay, so not only is that wonderful biblical veneration, right, from the historical timeline and the actual words in the book, but it's exactly what Deuteronomy 17 said do not do. All right, I just think that's really sad. But at the same time, let's look in the next chapter, verse 11, verses 1 through 8, because it's along the same vein. Okay, and 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1 says, "Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after other gods." Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord, as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully, as David his father had done. Solomon built a high place for Shamash, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountains which is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus also he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. It's crazy, man. It's horrible, because 4 times in that short passage it says these women turned his heart away from God, and that was the direct instruction in verse 18. Deuteronomy 17:18 was like, don't multiply wives, for they will turn your heart away from God. And we see the fulfillment of that in Solomon's day, and it's just sad. All right, and so this next one here is in Proverbs 23. This is our next pairing from one of the books of wisdom, and I think it's verse 10 and 11. 10 and 11, Proverbs 23. Now, we paired this up. Which one did we pair this up with, sweetie?
Deuteronomy 19:14, referencing the boundary markers.
Ah, that's right. Yeah. So, it says, "Do not move do not move the ancient boundary, or go into the fields of the fatherless, for their Redeemer is strong. He will plead their case against you." Short little snippet, but I liked it because it says their Redeemer is strong. He will plead their case against you. Okay, so suddenly out of nowhere, we get Deuteronomy 19 mention these boundary marker deals and how it seems to be a big deal to the Father, right? But then it talks about the Redeemer is strong. That's a messianic reference, okay? And, well, when he comes back, he sets all the boundaries straight, right? So, I mean, that's amazing that this is kind of a proleptic concept in Deuteronomy 19:14, where he's talking about, hey, these ancient boundary stones. Now, where would we even get these boundary stones?
Well, our next pairing from the extra biblical might tell us.
So guys, when you're looking at these, what seems like a random little instruction in the Torah, right, where it says, "Don't move the ancient boundary stones." That's bad. That's a bad thing. This is a fundamental pretext to this whole concept that goes back to the patriarchs.
Right.
Okay, all the way back to Noah.
Back to the flood. Yeah,
back to Noah
flood.
and Shem and Ham and Japheth. So that's what we're going to read next. It's in Jubilees. It's our extra biblical book we're pairing up this time. Jubilees chapter 9.
Okay, and we actually have 2 pairings from Jubilees. We have chapter 9 and verse 1, and then the other one we did is chapter 10, 28 through 34. So let me get over to those and read those. So Jubilees chapter 9 and verse 1 tells us, "And Ham divided amongst his sons, and the first portion came forth for Cush towards the east, and to the west of him for Mitzrayim, and to the west of him for Put, and to the west of him, and to the west thereof on the sea for Canaan." So we have that in chapter 9.
This is the introduction of Noah gets off the boat with his 3 sons, and then now they've already had Noah's had some grandsons already, and they're dividing up the land. And the land that was apportioned to Shem, he's now dividing up to his 4 sons. And that's what we're reading about here.
All right. Okay? So then in chapter 10, and this is going to be verses 28 through 34, "And Ham and his sons went into the land which he was to occupy, which he acquired as his portion in the land of the south. And Canaan saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Egypt, that it was very good. And he went not into the land of his inheritance to the west, that is to the sea, and he dwelt in the land of Lebanon, eastward and westward from the border of Jordan and from the border of the sea. And Ham his father, and Cush, and Mitzrayim his brothers, said unto him, Thou hast settled in a land which is not thine, and which did not fall to us by lot. Do not do so, for if thou dost do so, thou and thy sons will fall in the land, and be accursed through sedition. For by sedition ye have settled, and by sedition will thy children fall, and thou shalt be rooted out forever. Dwell not in the dwelling of Shem, for to Shem and to his sons did it come by their lot. Cursed art thou, and cursed shalt thou be beyond all the sons of Noah, by the curse by which we bound ourselves by an oath in the presence of the holy judge, and in the presence of Noah our father. But he did not hearken unto them, and dwelt in the land of Lebanon, from Hamath to the entering of Egypt, he and his sons until this day. And for this reason that land is named Canaan. And I mean, the first time I read this, it was the context I needed to understand the whole point of why it's called the land of Canaan in the book, and why they had to be rooted out, because that was not their inheritance. So a lot of us just think that it was just about them being Nephilim tribes, but he was never supposed to have settled there to begin with. That's
right. Yes, there was Nephilim happenings in other places beyond the land of Canaan, and they were allowed to run freely and do their thing freely.
The kings of Egypt.
But this particular land, which is a part of the Promised Land, was a portion to Shem. And when it does tell us in chapter 9, verse 1, was that Canaan was given this little portion. And the best I could figure from its description is that it would be the southern part of the continent of Africa towards the Atlantic side. That western part, if you were to draw, two halves of Africa.
Do they call that the Horn?
No, that would be the other side.
Okay.
Right? I think that's the side that was given to Mitzrayim. Okay. Or maybe even Put. But on the Atlantic side, right, not the Indian Ocean side, but the Atlantic side of Africa, and the bottom part of Africa, that lower quadrant portion, a quarter of it, was apparently what was given to Canaan, which is very far away from the land of Canaan as we see in the Bible, right? So, and it's a good land, right? It is a good land if you've ever been there for tourism. I mean, Africa's beautiful, but he said, no, I want some of Shem's land, specifically between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, which is that hot zone that we see all the Israelites in the book of Deuteronomy coming in to try to root them all out, okay? And yes, there's Nephilim activity happening there. Yes, there's multiple things at play here. There's the sedition from which Canaan stole Shem's land.
He ignored the boundary markers.
That were set up for Shem, okay? And this is why, by the way, in Genesis 14, when we see the Battle of the Nine Kings and Abraham has to go rescue Lot from Kedorlaomer, and then he comes back and he offers the bread and the wine and the offering to Melchizedek, right? And that Melchizedek, other extra biblical texts and alludings tell us that was Shem.
Right.
I know that's up for debate for a lot of people, but from all my research, I've been sold on that. But when you match up the timelines and who was alive and what was going on, and the idea of the priesthoods, to me that was Shem. And Abraham is going to make his offer of thanks and gratitude and tithe to the priest in that area, which was in the area of Salem. He was the king of Salem, which is in the land of Canaan, just a little bit west of the Dead Sea, all right? Very close to Jerusalem. So the point is, Shem was there in his land, and the Canaanites and Canaan and his people started flourishing around them because they weren't supposed to.
Right.
So, sweetie, is this what Noah was cursing Canaan for in Genesis 9?
I mean, it certainly rings of that "cursed be Canaan" quote that we all know
think
so well.
Yeah,
and we think it was, some inappropriate things with.
Well, here's the interesting part that people kind of slip over. You're exactly like you just said.
Yeah.
Ham was the one that saw Noah laying uncovered in his tent and told his brothers outside. But yet, when Noah gets up and he gets mad, finding out what's happened, he curses Canaan.
Yeah.
And people were like, oh, he prophesied Canaan. And I'm like, no. If
Canaan was already alive.
Yeah, if you read Jubilees and some of the other passages, like you understand during this time, that Genesis doesn't give us a very good time frame about the events in chapter 9 and 10. It jumps around a lot and just gives us a summary, That's
why the lesser Genesis, which
like
is what
Jubilees
is called, it comes
breaks
in
it down
handy.
Systematically in a great chronology. But at that point, Canaan was already alive. He was already a grandson of Ham. and that's why he can curse Canaan.
Yeah.
For what's going on. And does it make any sense at all? Is Noah a righteous judge and a righteous person to curse Canaan for something that Ham did? Like Ham saw him uncovered in his tent because he got drunk. Would it make any sense for him to wake up and curse his son?
No,
does that sound like a
it
good
doesn't,
granddad?
and that's why everybody has been led into these really Oedipus Rex style, stories that to make sense of it, when actually the context that we need for that is right here.
That's right.
In the Lesser Genesis.
Yeah, people have tried to say that Canaan was the illegitimate son of Ham and Noah's wife and all kinds of stuff. And I get it. There's because of the wording of it, people think it means that they equate it to what, Deuteronomy 22?
Uncovering his skirt.
Something like that. So we're going to read, I think, maybe next week.
Yeah, uncovering the father's
they
skirt.
They try to equate those two terms,
right.
But it doesn't say he uncovered his, it just said he saw him laying naked in the tent.
Yeah.
Told his brother outside, and his brothers was the ones that covered his shame and not Ham. So, I don't know. It's written in summary. But thankfully, we got something like the Book of Jubilees that tells us this idea of where the land of Canaan, and that term that's used all throughout the Torah, where that originates from, because we never get its definition in Torah.
Well, and it even says right there in Jubilees, "Cursed are you, Canaan, and all your descendants, and you'll be rooted out of that land."
That's right.
So they even use the same verbiage that Noah uses to curse Canaan.
That's right. So. It even talks about messianic prophecies later in Jubilees, how the descendants of Canaan are going to be thoroughly rooted out once the Messiah returns. Right. And it's just that, and there's a long-standing history there is really the thing. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
This is our last one.
Pairings.
It's our pairing from the Brit, the New Testament, and it's in Luke 12, verses 13 through 13 and 14, and then also John 8, 1 through 11. And so we paired this up from Deuteronomy 16,
18, where we talked about judging with righteous judgment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Luke 12, if I can find it real quick, verses 13 and 14, it says, "Someone in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me.' But Jesus said to them, 'Man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?'" Do you hear some like attitude in that? Man, who do you think I am? Your judge or arbitrator over you?
Well, I hear some rightly dividing of the word.
Yes,
I hear some.
That's true.
Yeshua knowing his place, for lack of a better term, at that first coming, at that first time that he was here.
At the first time he was not a judge.
Because he will be the judge when he comes back.
That's at his resurrection, Son of Man status.
He was not appointed a judge. He wasn't.
That's right.
That wasn't officially his role at that point. So then we also have John 8. 1 through 11.
John 8 is kind of a fun little verse. Do you want to read it?
Sure.
Okay.
"But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery, the very act. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?' They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, 'He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her.' Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone, and the woman where she was in the center of the court. Straightening up, Jesus said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said, 'I do not condemn you either. Go, from now on sin no more.'" So again,
there it is.
A popular interpretation of this passage in some of in the mainstream churches is that the law Jesus came to do away with the law, and he had the power to say, "Nope, I'm not going to condemn you for that sin. You're forgiven. Go and sin no more." But these people, it says right there, the Pharisees were doing this to test him. Because the Pharisees were not following the law. They didn't bring both the man and the woman. They didn't have witnesses. And Jesus was not a judge. He wasn't a Levite. They weren't supposed to bring him to determine that case in the first place.
That's right. Yeah. That's like going to, an accountant for something that you would go to the courthouse for.
Right, exactly.
And saying, "Hey, why don't you make an official judgment for me?"
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, "I'm not."
Yeah.
So, of course, Jesus, knowing the law, saw through all this real quick, right? And we see his famous response to that. But that's where we just want to pair up two different occasions based off Deuteronomy 16 about rightly dividing the law, right, being a judge righteously, because Jesus will be the judge, right? The Son of Man will judge all things, but he knew his place at that time, his first coming. He was to be the suffering servant. He was to be a man of obedience. And in the role that he was in at that time, which was before he received his priesthood, before he received his judgeship, if you will, they were asking him to do something that was not his place.
Yeah. And they were in sin by bringing her the way they brought her, without witnesses, without the man. So when he says, who is without sin cast the first stone, it isn't necessarily this popular interpretation of, oh, we're all sinners and none of us have any right to judge anything. We're all familiar with that. He's saying they're in sin by not following the law, by bringing her the way that they brought her in the first place. So
that's right. In fact, I did an entire video on this particular topic and passage, and what you're seeing on the screen right here is the title of the video, so you can go onto the channel and you can find it elsewhere. I'll also put the link in the description, but I go over this and break this down from the law, why that Jesus didn't stone her, right? Because it would have been, as we were talking about, it would have been out of bounds. That's to me very important that we understand, Yeshua through the lens of the Torah, because this is all the behavior that he exemplified we're going to be doing in the kingdom to come, right? So when we're resurrected with Torah in our heart, so we can't make a mistake and not do it, more instinctively do it. It's just going to be amazing, because we're gonna basically be like we saw Yeshua. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Full of love, righteousness, just peace, and power.
And we're going to be sinless. We're going to be no longer struggling with sin.
That's right. It's going to be an amazing time. Lord, let your kingdom come.
Yeah, amen.
All right. Sweetie, would you like to say anything as we sign off?
Just thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I appreciate it. And as always, I just want to encourage everyone that the Bible can be understood. It can be understood in its fullness, and it can be understood to the point where we can easily preach the gospel to all creatures, believer, non-believer alike, and be able to answer questions when asked and make sense of these things for people that for so long have just been so discombobulated and not making any sense. And so, here at Kingdom in Context, we like to say that context creates comprehension. And that basically just means the more you understand the context of something, the better you're going to be able to comprehend it. And so it's not just about, knowing the words in your head. It's about actually being able to comprehend them and actually teach them to others, because we should all be going out and be able to, teach the gospel of the kingdom. But if we don't keep the kingdom in context and understand what the gospel of the kingdom is, we cannot teach it to people. So that's our goal here. We want you guys to be able to do exactly what we're doing. Open the book up, show people the context of things, help them to better understand it. So because
once you realize how easy it is, it becomes a great joy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, you can't put it down.
It's a load lifted off, and then whatever conversation you're in, there's application that you can go to, and it will amplify your walk with the Father. Yeah. And we hope that you can pick that up from these videos. Yeah. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining me.
Always.
Shabbat shalom, baby.
Shabbat shalom. Right. Shabbat shalom, guys.
Shabbat shalom,
Have
guys.
a good week.